want it to be longer or shorter?
No, I would.
I will go as quickly as possible for you.
I love your shirt, by the way.
All right, so in order to talk about the judicial
Don't fall,
branch,
Shelby.
Oh my gosh.
we have to go to which article of the U.S. Constitution?
It doesn't last for like a couple of months. You were close.
Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution. Okay? Why would we put it third?
Because it's the third branch.
It's the least important, okay? Or at least in the minds of the framers of the U.S. Constitution. They thought it was not an afterthought, but the least significance, okay? So they ordered them legislative, executive, judicial, because they knew that this was not going to be as significant as the legislative branch, at least, okay? Now that being said, we've seen the Supreme Court and the judicial branch evolve pretty significantly over the last 220 years, okay? Article 3 doesn't really say a whole lot. It says that we'll have one, it creates the U.S. Supreme Court, and that's about it, okay? And it talks a little bit about how they become on the Supreme Court. Okay, but their real power that the Supreme Court and the judicial branch has is going to actually not come from the Constitution. It's where it's going to come from. It's kind of great because they actually created their own
Checks and balances, checks and balances.
power. Yeah, Marbury versus Madison. Okay, and this is why this is the most important case in probably the entire course, because it gives power to a branch of government, in the sense that we have the power of judicial review. Now, don't write that down unless you know what it is. But I can guarantee you that there will be a question about judicial review on the AP test. What do we got? What is it?
When the courts say no to something.
What are they saying no to, and how are they saying no? Yes?
You
It's
say
when they,
what-
sorry, that's when they declare whether something's unconstitutional or not.
Okay, so what they're doing is their primary responsibility is to interpret the law, and so as a result, they interpret the law by deeming whether it matches up with the U.S. Constitution. Okay, so does this decision or action take place in light of the Constitution? Now, this is where it gets interesting, because at the end of the day, you guys know that the Constitution is not very exhaustive, right? Like it says you have free speech. So that's it. Like, how do I define whether or not something is considered free speech or not free speech? So that's where interpretation is going to play out pretty significantly. Okay? So this becomes their significant power. It also becomes their significant check on virtually every other part of the government. Okay? So they can strike down laws that Congress makes. They can strike down executive orders and actions that the president takes. They can strike down regulations, implementation of bureaucratic organizations.
Andy
Or
Marks, please call the front
by
office. Andy Marks,
writing an
please
opinion.
call the front office.
It's pretty good, right?
I mean, you can look at like Trump's travel ban right now, right? Where you guys know, heard about that, right?
Yeah.
Stopping people from coming into the country. Like people took it to the courts. The court said it's unconstitutional. And so even though he made an executive order and he's the president and he's allowed to give executive orders, they can still be checked through that process of judicial review.
All right. Now, the second thing that we talked about in this unit was the structure of the federal court system. Now remember, judicial branch represents federalism. So we have national courts, we have state courts, local courts, okay? We're only concerned about the national level. Now, there are a couple different types of courts, okay? We have what's called the normal courts, or sometimes they're referred to as the constitutional courts. And then we also have what they call special courts. Okay, so make sure you understand that they exist. You may know an example of a special court.
What happens if you want to complain about your taxes? What court who would you go to?
It's not a
Somebody take a
complicated
guess.
answer.
Ah, good job! Yeah, tax court.
Oh yeah.
Or like, what if you're like a veteran and you want to sue the government because you're not getting your benefits properly?
You get a veteran court.
The Veterans Affairs, right? The Court of Veterans Affairs.
So what Mr. Cochran is saying is that some issues are hyper-specific, okay? The tax code book in America is 1,000 pages long. So if you want to be a judge of that, like, you're not just going to be a generalist, you're going to be a specialist in that. So if there's a tax fraud case, it's going to go to that special court, okay? But most normal stuff is going to go through our normal court system, okay? So the U.S. Supreme Court sits at the top. Who's at the second level? Or the bottom level? Glad we have these review sessions. Apparently we don't remember anything. My semester kids, I'm disappointed. We learned about this like 3 weeks ago.
I had a really stupid test this morning that we're all sick.
I did not take a test, this is just.
Alright, so the second level is called the U.S. Courts of Appeals, and the third level is called the District Courts. Okay? Now, each of these levels is important for a different reason, okay? Now, the two differences between these lower level
Andy
courts...
Marks, if you're in the building, please call the front office.
Is there a thing called cell phones, right? What they call a cell phone?
And get Mr. Marks.
We have desk phones, cell phones, email. Alright, district courts, there's 94 total in the United States of America. They practice a specific type of jurisdiction. I don't remember what that's called. It's called original jurisdiction. What does that mean? What is it? Yeah, they're the first ones to hear the trial, okay? So original jurisdiction means that it happened in their area, okay? So if you commit a crime, a federal crime, if you start dealing drugs across the state of Ohio and Kentucky, you're going to get ramped up on federal charges and you're going to go to the District Court of Southern Ohio. Does that make sense? Because it happened here, it goes to the court that's closest to you. Now this is kind of your courtroom scene. So if you've seen Law and Order, this is it, right? You've got witnesses, you've got a jury box, you've got attorneys arguing cases, opening, closing statements, all that fun stuff, okay? They make a decision. Now, if you don't like that decision, then you can appeal upwards to the U.S. Court of Appeals, where they practice appellate jurisdiction. So they don't hear any cases for the first time. All they're doing is reviewing lower court cases. Now, why would they review a lower court case?
Determine if any mistakes were made.
Yeah, okay. They're kind of, think of it as like the varsity level, like JV to varsity type, okay? Or think, let's say like you didn't do your homework and so I give you a 4-hour-long detention and you think that's supremely unjust. And so you might appeal to a higher level authority, right? So you might go to Mr. Stoddard and say, hey, Mr. Faust is being a jerk. He just gave me a 4-hour detention for a measly homework assignment, okay? Now, Mr. Stoddard can appeal, right? He is the appeal. So he can either decide to agree with Mr. Faust and maintain the punishment that's given, or because he's the higher authority, he can overturn that decision and say, you know what, actually, Mr. Faust, you're being unreasonable, no detention. Or let's make it only a 20-minute detention. Does that make sense? That's what the U.S. Court of Appeals does, all right? Now, the next level up is like the Mac Daddy, right? This is like the superintendent of schools. You take it all the way up to the final level, okay? The Supreme Court has both, okay? And that's why they're particularly unique. Because in theory, they could hear an original case if they wanted to. Now, the vast majority of the cases that they hear are appellate. Okay, so you could, if they decided like, ooh, this is a special case, something significant, we're going to hear the case for the first time, they could. But most of the time, they're going to hear a case that's been appealed up the ranks. Okay? Also of note in this, very few cases make it all the way to the top level. Okay? The district courts make the most decisions. The appellate court makes some, the Supreme Court decides very few. Of the couple thousand cases appealed to them every year, they're hearing like 100. Okay? So it's very, very rare that they're going to hear your case. If you get there, you're a big deal. And they're picking the biggest, most controversial issues of the day. Okay? So they're kind of the final authority. They're trying to be like the, if this is like clearly unresolved, then we'll talk about it. Otherwise, we're going to let the lower courts make those decisions. Anything else? The other thing is that they tend to hear civil cases as opposed to criminal cases. Okay? So they're not usually determining the guilt or innocence of a person in a crime. Usually it's like a, is this free speech or not? Or does the president have the power to do this? Okay? It's questions of the Constitution.
Civil rights and civil liberties, right? A lot of the court cases that we saw there were Supreme Court cases that were started in the district courts, went to the Court of Appeals, and ended at the U.S. Supreme Court. A lot of the civil cases dealing with people's rights. Someone feels their rights were violated, or you were wronged in some way. Sometimes there are contract disputes, things like that.
All right, so let's move on. How do I become a judge? Now this is actually different from the state level, right? You learned today in the state level that how do you become a judge? You get elected, right? You have to run for election as governor.
Oh, right.
But a judge has to run for election, like a congressman does, or the governor, or president does. But at the federal level, you're not elected. You are what we would refer to as indirectly elected, okay? Which means we elect the people who choose you to be judge. So there's a two-step process. Who's going to pick our judges? This is the softball people tossing it up.
It just
Hit
happened
it out of the park.
in the U.S. government.
The president chooses.
Well, what does he do? What's the vocab word for that? What does he do? He appoints.
Come on,
And then,
FRQ.
then, Senate confirms. Okay, the Constitution says that they shall confirm with the advice and the consent of the Senate.
Well, that's another vocab word. Advice and consent.
Is it on our list?
Oh yeah.
Put it on there?
Might even be on the quiz tomorrow.
Ooh. Advice and consent.
Oh my god.
Non-semester.
Oh, non-semester, my bad.
Year long.
The year long.
Year long.
We actually have a lot of semesters.
Yeah. Even first
Alright,
semester.
anyways, so this is a great example. This is a small microcosm of what principle in American democracy. Microcosm means like a, we know what that means.
I don't know.
What does this reflect in America? What do we value? No one getting too much power. So what we do is we
Say it again,
create
Leah, louder.
checks and
You said checks?
balances. Nobody even said balances, did they?
I said just balance. I'm
Leah
just
said
quiet.
This is what the AP test loves, guys.
They do. In fact,
Intermingling branches.
I'm making the bold
parts.
prediction, which is usually wrong, but take it for what it's worth. I think this is going to be an FRQ-ish type question, if not this year and the years to come, okay? Because what it does is it gets at everything that we talk about in the federal government, right? We divide up power, so we give each individual branch of the government some power, and we also then make sure that they're checking each other, okay? So how is the Supreme Court justice checked in this right here? They have to rely on the other branches to pick them, right? So you don't get to be in the judicial branch unless the other branches are say, okay, you're cool. All right? How's the president checked? The Senate, right? The Senate says, we have to agree with whoever you pick, okay? And then, of course, how's the Congress checked? They don't get to pick, right? They merely have the veto power, essentially. We flipped the veto, the bill, and the law rule. Okay? And then, of course, all of this is checked with the Supreme Court because they can come back and say, sorry, President, we don't like what you're doing, you have to stop, right? That's unconstitutional. Or same with the Senate. Okay? So there's this kind of back and forth to say, everybody kind of has this, like, card they can play against the other branch of the government. All right? Now, this is a big deal depending on the level of the government or the structure of the courts that we're talking about, okay? Now, you have to do this for the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals, and the district courts. Now, the district courts, we see a principle called senatorial courtesy play out when it comes to picking a judge. Anybody remember what senatorial courtesy is? Think through it, okay? If you don't know a term, just think what it says. A senate and a courtesy. What could that be? Yeah, okay. So the president is going to go and talk to the senator from that state and say, hey, this person's from your state or this opening's from your state. Who might be a good person that I could nominate which would fast track the confirmation process? Okay, now this isn't required, it's just tradition, but you see this show up on the AP test from time to time where the senator gets a little bit of say in determining who's going to be in that district court. Okay, now, the Supreme Court though, that's the president's baby, right? Because at the end of the day, every judge serves life terms. Now, why do we have life terms at the federal level? Okay, they're above the law. They make decisions that aren't influenced by another election. And we want it that way, because we don't want our decision made based on politics. We want our decision made on the law itself, okay? So, when I'm President of the United States, what are the factors that are going to influence who I choose to be president, or not president, Supreme Court Justice? There's lots, but let's say 4. Nothing? We can't even get one of the 4? If I'm Donald Trump, what's going to go into my mind when I make a decision of who's going to be the next Supreme Court Justice? Absolutely. So ideology, right? So even though Supreme Court justices are supposed to be above politics, the president is not above politics. So he's going to try and pick somebody that's going to be similar to his own views. Okay, we call this the extension of your legacy. Because you're picking somebody that's going to be on the bench much longer than you're in the presidency. And so if you could pick the right person, they're going to continue to perpetuate your plans and policies over the next 20, 30 years potentially. Okay? So ideology, right? We want to know, pick somebody that's similar to you and your belief system. What else?
The people.
Hmm?
The people. Just the people. There's the
You're also going to want to think about their philosophy as to how they judge, right? So we would say you're either a judicial restraint person or an activist. Okay, because this is going to dictate what you think about past decisions.
Vocab words
Original.
might be on the quiz tomorrow.
Strict constructionism, okay? So somebody who practices judicial restraint, like Neil Gorsuch, the guy that just got on in the Supreme Court, he's going to be a law and order guy, right? He's going to say, look, I'm just here to take the law and apply it, okay? And he practices a specific bend of it called originalism, which is, what did they intend in this law originally in 1789 when they wrote it, okay? So I have to read through the frame of the lens that the Constitution is stable, it's enduring, okay? We don't change the law because we're supposed to, we just apply it. And so they're oftentimes going to use precedent to justify future laws, okay? Or to apply to the current decision that needs to be made. An activist, though, says the Constitution's living, right? It's flexible. They created it vague so that we could read into it what our culture thinks or wants. And so an activist would say, you know what, we're going to shift. As society shifts, we shift. And so they might be more apt to overturn a precedent or to adapt a new approach to what the law says. Okay? So I want to know that, right? Because I want to know, what are they doing with Roe v. Wade? And if I have strong opinions as president on Roe v. Wade, I'm going to try and put somebody that's going to overturn it or not overturn it. Anything else that you would think of? I would say just, well, let's do this. Qualifications. Now, there are no actual responsibilities or qualifications that a Supreme Court justice has to have to become a Supreme Court justice. Like if Donald Trump wanted to nominate Mr. Funk tomorrow to a vacancy, he could. He could, absolutely, okay? What's the thing that's going to matter, though, in terms of qualifications in this process? You got to get somebody that the Senate's going to agree to, right? So you're not just going to pick Joe Schmo off the street or your best bud. You need to pick somebody that's qualified, otherwise the Senate's going to be like, no, that's ridiculous, right? Sorry, Mr. Funk, but...
I mean, it's usually going to be somebody with a judicial background, maybe a federal court judge, just like the new one, just like Neil Gorsuch. Maybe it'll be someone that has some type of legal experience. We mentioned this morning the law professor. Lena Kagan was a law professor. Someone who knows the law, who practices the law. It's not just going to be a random person.
Why couldn't it be a teacher though? Because I mean, like you're a government teacher, you know the law pretty well. You just can't teach it.
We don't actually know the law. We just know
We know the court cases. But like somebody that's been through law school, especially Ivy League law school, is going to know a lot more than.
And that's what we said. Like all the Supreme Court justices right now are really, really well qualified, right? Okay, they all went to law school, they've all been to Harvard, Yale Law School. We're not talking about like your low league, like how did they go?
Night school.
Like this is your major leagues, okay? This is like the best of the best.
One of them went to Oxford in England.
Yeah. Okay? Alright, last factor I put on there is age. Why does age matter when I'm thinking about who I'm going to nominate to the Supreme Court? The younger the better, right? If I'm president, because if I can get a 40-year-old onto the bench, that means they've got 40 years in the court. Okay? If I'm nominating a 70-year-old, I'm probably doing this again in 5 years. Like, just, I mean, I don't know. All these people end up living to be like 90 years old.
Ruthless Bader won't die.
Ruth will never die.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg is
Ruth.
incredible.
Ruthless Bader.
20 push-ups, dude.
Shit, more than I do.
Alright.
Me and Coughlin combined.
One of the
knock
last
out 2
things
or
that we
3.
talked about is how the Supreme Court here decides to hear a case. Okay? So the first step that the Supreme Court does is they have to decide whether or not they're going to hear the case in the first place. Now we call this the rule of 4. What it means is that of
Might be a
those
vocab word for the
thousands-
quiz.
You really are inviting me now.
It might be a vocab word for the quiz tomorrow.
Like if people miss this on the vocab quiz, I'm going to be really angry. Did you use the word 4 in the quiz?
It's what's on the paper. Rule of 4. I typed it like I gave the definition
but you
for
like
it.
when 4 justices agree to hear a case.
No, I said, no. I did not use the word 4 in the definition.
Alright.
I think I used the word process.
We'll all do the same vocab quiz.
Oh,
Well,
we got
Mr.
that
Cochran
wrong.
didn't.
Probably didn't pay attention.
Alright, so the rule of 4 is the idea that the Supreme Court is going to decide whether or not to hear the case. And as we said, we're talking about less than 1% of all cases appealed to the Supreme Court, they're actually choosing to vote to hear it, okay? So, as long as 4 of them agree, then they're going to hear the case. Now, once they agree to hear the case, they issue what's called a writ of certiorari. Okay, a writ of certiorari is the idea or concept that they're sending an acknowledgement to a lower court level, so the U.S. Court of Appeals, district courts, saying, hey, we've decided to hear the appeal to this case. Please send us the records and everything that took place in that case so that we can review and make a decision on it. Okay? Now, I always tell my students, like, people don't realize that we've only been digitized in this society for the last, 15 years, okay? So writs of certiorari in 1804 is like, hey, let's go send somebody to Colorado to load up the records and bring them to us, okay? So writs is kind of a big deal because you actually had to have the transfer of the documents. Because the Supreme Court case, they're not hearing the case again, okay? We're not having those witnesses and the jury box thing, okay? They're just simply reading a bunch of papers and making a decision, all right? Now, the one part of the piece is that they'll have oral arguments. Okay, they'll bring in the attorneys from both sides, where they'll hear the decisions or the claims that both sides are making, and then after that, they simply take a vote. Every vote's out of 9, unless there's only 8 on the court, and they'll write opinions as a result of the vote. Okay, so in every case, there will be a majority opinion, which isn't that complicated, right?
Vocab word.
To one.
Well, that is literally on there, yeah.
It's so.
Get after it. There's a couple more coming.
So the majority opinion is those that won the case. They'll assign one of the justices to write the legal
Question is, will anyone watch this
argument or
tonight?
reasoning for why they decided what they did. Okay, so they're basically gonna lay out the legal argument. Okay, so was that Oberfell thing helpful this morning?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so let's take Oberfell v. Hodges. It's not a case you need to know for the test, but does anybody know what it's about? This is the gay marriage case. That happened 2 years ago. Legalized gay marriage in the United States. Okay? Anthony Kennedy wrote the majority opinion in it, and it basically what he argued was the 14th Amendment. Okay? So he went straight to the 14th Amendment. Anybody know what clause he used?
Equal rights for all.
Equal Protection Clause. You're close. Okay? And what he said is, look, marriage is a right. And this is a civil rights issue. And so as a result of the fact that this group has been limited in their ability to get married, we are not providing equal protection of the law to different groups within the United States, right? We're discriminating based on sexual orientation. And so that violates the 14th Amendment, which struck down the Ohio law that had banned gay marriage. Okay? Now, on the flip side, though, Antonin Scalia wrote a dissenting opinion. Okay? The dissenting opinion is the minority, the lost. Okay? They're going to write a counter argument. And so he argued the 10th Amendment, which says,
Anything not
It goes to the states.
marriage is a state issue. So the federal government should not be hearing a case on gay marriage. Right? He says it's up to the individual states. Okay, this is a reserve power. The federal government is overstepping its bounds by trying to rule on this particular decision. And so therefore he argued that they should just simply throw the case out, right? Like it wasn't their jurisdiction to make the decision at all. Okay? So you have different legal arguments playing itself out. Alright? And that's where the number makes a big difference. So like if it's a 9-0 decision, like that's pretty straight 7 picks, right? Like that's a done deal. But if it's a 5-4 case, like Roe v. Wade, Oberfeld v. Hodges, then all of a sudden you start to get that wiggle room of, could this ever potentially be overturned? Okay? We'll see, but it seems like generally we've avoided overturning big pieces of legislation like that. One other opinion is called a concurring opinion. If you concur, who's the person that always says I concur? Is that Sherlock Holmes?
No.
I concur.
Trust me, we know this.
I was in Titanic. Leonardo DiCaprio's character always did that when he didn't know what to talk about.
Maybe like your old school Sherlock Holmes.
I concur.
No, this
Or
guy-
no. He was in Catch Me If You Can when he was with the doctors.
None of this like
I
new
concur.
age Benedict Cumberbatch crap. Sherlock Holmes.
Excuse
I knew it was a Leonardo DiCaprio character.
I read
Joking.
the first of the Sherlock
I
books.
just did it to make you mad, alright?
Fight me.
A concurring opinion agrees with the majority decision, but for a different reason. Alright? So it's kind of like a second opinion on why that's the case. They're agreeing with the majority, but they're saying, there's a different legal argument that I'm saying. So maybe, I don't think there was a concurrent opinion in Oberfeld, but maybe you argue the 9th Amendment, which says,
There are protections that aren't included in the Bill of Rights, but just because they're not included doesn't mean they're not protections.
there you go. So marriage is actually a civil liberty. Government can't infringe upon your right. That's a civil liberty of marriage.
Yeah, well, you know what?
Maybe. That wasn't actually argument, but we'll just try to. All right, the last big thing in the Supreme Court, or the judicial branch, is the Supreme Court cases, okay? Every year, students ask us, what Supreme Court cases do I need to know? And that is not an easy question, because they don't just give us a clean list to say, know these 15 to 20 Supreme Court cases.
Next year
okay?
they will.
Yeah, you guys missed out. Next year they're giving us an actual list. So, I will tell you the few that tend to consistently show up every time, okay? Marbury versus Madison is on every AP test. Okay? Roe v. Wade is almost on every AP test. Plessy versus Ferguson, and then subsequently Brown versus the Board of Education are on every AP test. Do we know these? Do I need to stop and go over them?
What is Roe v. Wade?
Roe v. Wade is, we haven't got there in the semester, we'll get there. Okay, it's the right to privacy, it's the abortion case, okay? McCulloch versus Maryland is an implied powers case and a supremacy clause. Remember the question was, can the federal government or Congress do something that's not enumerated in the Constitution, like create a national bank? And they said yes, creating implied powers, and it put the national government over the state of Maryland, so supremacy clause. Let's see, Gibbons versus Ogden is going to be about what?
State control of transportation of commerce.
Go. National government has the right to regulate interstate trade. It upholds that. Barron versus Baltimore is the pre-incorporation case. So it takes place in the 1830s, and what they say is the Bill of Rights does not apply to the state governments, okay? And then the 14th Amendment's going to come around and essentially overturn Barron versus Baltimore and say, yes, actually, it does. Ohio has to give you your Bill of Rights in our country, okay? And then the rest of them are like your big, like, amendment cases, okay, or your civil liberties cases. So think like Gideon versus Wainwright, which is counsel, Miranda versus Arizona, which is incrimination, Tinker versus Des Moines, which is symbolic speech. And then from there, most of the stuff is, you might see it show up, but generally it's not like it's going to be on the test, okay? It'll like maybe be phrased in a multiple choice or something. But I would think like New York Times versus Sullivan, Gideon, or not Gideon, Griswold v. Connecticut, Harmon v. Georgia,
Gitlow versus New York.
Gitlow versus New York. Those are the ones that we've seen. Okay.
And you usually see these things either in the form of multiple choice questions, not what every detail of the case is about, okay? But more along the lines of like, you'll see a multiple choice question about like what the issue was in Marbury versus Madison, or what the issue was in Roe versus Wade. Also, you'll use court cases a lot, like they'll use them in the stems of FRQs. Like they'll reference a case in the stem, and in order to answer the question, you got to know what the issue of the case was. Or you're using the issue in the case as an example and in the explain part of an FRQ as something to back up what you're trying to talk about or write about.
Supreme Court cases are great for examples. Like if you can weave a Supreme Court case into an essay, like even something like there's a question about Commerce Clause. Okay, that's primarily the Constitution, that's primarily Congress, but now you can all of a sudden say the Commerce Clause was established in the Constitution and followed up by Gibbs versus Ogden. Like, to me as a grader, I'm like, oh, this person knows what they're talking about, right? Because graders are human beings, okay? Like, we look for clues that tell me you know what you're actually talking about. And if we think you know what you're talking about, you get the benefit of the doubt. Does that make sense? So I'll say it like this, okay? There's lots of times when I'm grading an FRQ and I get an answer that I'm like, right? Like 50-50. I could give it to you if I'm nice and happy. I could not give it to you if I'm being a stickler for things. And here's the deal. You're going to get graders like that on the AP test, okay? Some people are going to be naturally a little bit more difficult in their grading, like Mr. Funk. He's just like red ink, like Mr. Coughlin's big soft.
Everybody gets points.
Well, I do that just to make you guys look good, because we can't grade yours, so we grade everybody else's. So if I got a stack from Florida, wrong.
Anyways,
Okay.
what we're saying is try to win people over, okay? You win people by the way you write. And if you add in some details and some examples, throw in a Supreme Court case, that's going to win people over.
Smiley faces over your eyes help too. Dot your eyes with
And
smiley
shout out
faces.
Mr. Coughlin and Mr. Funk because they're great.
Yes.
this year.
Yeah.
I did have a lady come up to me like,